Asteroid City is a film that you need to see twice. Let me explain. Hello everyone, my name is Mort and welcome to my channel. I'm going to do a bit of a film breakdown on the movie Asteroid City, Wes Anderson's newest theatrical full-length release. I see a lot of people watching this film, writing about this film, reviewing this film, having a sense of confusion about what they just saw and writing it off as not much more than stylistic pictures with some of the best actors in the business and some of the best craftsmen around. And I think there's so much more to this movie that it's really worth revisiting a second time to get more out of it, because I think what you're looking at here is something that's way deeper than the sum of its parts. Now, to make it really clear, this video is not a defense of Asteroid City or a rebuttal to the criticisms, nor would I want to suggest that if you didn't like Asteroid City, you just didn't get it. In fact, there's a lot of movies that I've seen in my lifetime where I thought to myself, I guess this appeals to some folks, but it just doesn't hit for me. There's certain filmmakers who are legends, like Ingmar Bergman, whose movies I've seen and I appreciate, but they don't affect me in the way that they affect others, and that's just fine. Art has a subjective way that it connects with all of us. What I would say, though, is that there is a lot to this film that it really is worth seeing again to dive into some of the themes and some of the things that are there that you may have missed the first time, because I think even with all of the complexities that are here, is the message underneath all of this one that is worth listening to? And from what I get out of it, I absolutely think so. Before I get into my thoughts about the film, I need to give you a couple of disclaimers. Number one, tons of spoilers ahead. You've been warned. If you haven't seen the movie yet, stop the video here, go see the movie, and then come back. Number two, my kids are in the movie. They play the triplet daughters of Jason Schwartzman's character. So naturally, I'm quite biased, but I still think that I've got some things to say here that could be really meaningful and hopefully add to the very fun discussions happening around this film. Number three, though my kids are in the film, I have no special knowledge about the story, the characters, the themes, nothing that was told to me by Wes or Roman in some kind of conversation or any of the cast members about their characters. All of these thoughts are from reading about the film, watching the film twice, thinking about it a lot, having it really sit with me. I'm the kind of person that is a super film nerd. Anytime I go see a movie, I need to go sit with someone afterwards and talk about it. I want to know what they got out of the movie. I like sharing what I got out of the movie. I'm a verbal processor, so I need to get all of this out, talk about all of this, and get feedback. So I want your comments here too, because I think some of the things that I'm about to say could be totally wrong. Some of the things that I'm going to share could have nothing to do with what's actually happening in the movie, and yet this is how the movie hit me. And that's one of the really interesting things as an artist. When you make something, there's artistic intent, what the author means for the viewer, for the reader, for the listener to get out of their work, and then there's what the recipient gets out of it, and how sometimes that has nothing to do with what the artist intended. And some of these things that I'm going to share have to do with philosophy, they have to do with therapy, they have to do with so many different things that they just may be really through my own filters and have nothing to do with anything that was intended. You've been warned, you've been told, and if you're still willing to come along the journey, let's get into the film. Asteroid City was filmed in Chinchon, Spain in the end of 2021. As soon as we got home in October, I started checking the internet constantly. Anything that I could find that showed information about the film, because I was so proud and excited for my kids and for what we saw in the film. And the very first thing that came out that I saw publicly was in July of 2022, and it was this: Asteroid City is a poetic meditation on the meaning of life. That little contextual informer should tell you how to approach seeing this movie. If you know genre, if you know what the theme is, if you know going into a film at some level what you're walking into, I think it helps take in the movie with a bit more of what it is intended to show. A lot of people, when they saw this movie, came out of the theater going, this makes no sense, there was no story, it was not emotional, there were so many characters, there was so much going on, it was so boring, I fell asleep. And other people going, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen, I was crying, I couldn't believe the images that were on the screen, and look at all these people doing this incredible work, and I was laughing. There's such a divided response about this movie, and I do think that having some genre expectations up front helps with viewing the film and understanding it. So going back to that phrase, a poetic meditation on the meaning of life. The two words that stand out from that phrase are poetic meditation. This is not going to be a very literal film. In other words, what you're seeing in front of you, a story of a playwright who is doing a play called Asteroid City, but it's being profiled by a television show, and there's this brilliant playwright, Conrader, and his love interest, Jason Schwartzman's character, and what they go through, and then there's the play itself, Asteroid City. Well, what is the point of all of this? If you look at that phrase, poetic meditation on the meaning of life, already there's something coming to mind. Number one, this is an existentialist film, and existentialism is essentially a philosophical inquiry into the meaning of life. So anytime you have a conversation about meaning and purpose, it's an existentialist conversation. That sets me up then in seeing the film that what I'm watching is really existing as a duality. In other words, there's the movie on screen, and then there's the thing underneath that. You should expect to look for metaphor, allegory, symbolism, all of these things that are what you're looking at is not what you're actually looking at, that there's layers deeper here than what's just right in front of you. The film reminds you at the very beginning from Bryan Cranston's narrator character that Asteroid City is not real. None of it is meant to be real. It's all meant to be a story. It's a play. This is so important to make sure that the viewer of the film knows this, that they wrote this into the script at the beginning of the play. When characters say things like Hank's character about the car, that everything is connected but nothing works, he might be talking about the car on screen, but he's actually probably talking about maybe the life experience. How many of us have gone through things where everything feels like it's supposed to be working? I've done everything right, everything is connected, but for some reason, nothing is working. When I think of this kind of duality, symbolism, allegory, metaphor, actually the film that comes to mind most recently for me anyways, is No Country for Old Men. You're set up to think that this Coen Brothers film is a cat and mouse chase, but it ends in a way that's very unsatisfying. At the end of the film, you don't see a climactic shootout, climactic fight scene. The movie ends with Tommy Lee Jones's character sitting at the dining room table with his wife, and he's reminiscing on this dream that he has about a conversation with his father, and then the film just ends. And after that movie was over, I thought, whatever I just watched is not what I think I just watched. Asteroid City, it's appropriate, I think, to go into this movie with a similar set of expectations that these things are going to symbolize other things, and there's more to this movie than just cool characters and Milena Cannonero's awesome costumes, all of this beautiful production design and cinematography and funny lines. There's more to it than that. And I think if you can get there, and if you have the patience to get there, there's a really rewarding philosophical and emotional experience to be had with this film. Wes says a lot in press interviews, this is a movie about actors and the acting process. I was looking way more at how this whole film is couched in grief. I see grief in nearly every aspect of this film, whether it's the Steenbeck family grieving the loss of their mother, or whether it's Conrad Earp's character dying at the end of the film. So symbolism, allegory, metaphor, poetic meditations, none of this is real. Aliens? During one scene in the movie, an alien comes to Asteroid City and visits, and after that alien visits, the whole town of Asteroid City is put on a mandatory lockdown and quarantine. I cannot help but see that as just being about COVID itself. That's kind of what COVID felt like. It felt like this alien visited from outer space. There's a massive grief that comes with quarantine. All of us have had to give up something of value, of what keeps us going in order to live our lives because of the pandemic and because of all the things that came with that. Everything changed. The second part is when the alien comes back, returns the asteroid, quarantine is reimposed, everyone in the town goes crazy, Augie walks off stage, he's now Jones Hall, the actor, and while he's off stage, he sits down with the director and he's exasperated. He sits down with him and he says, I don't get this. I don't understand what is the point of this whole story. I don't understand what is the meaning of all of this. And then he says something to the effect of, the more we do this play over and over again, my heart keeps breaking. If you look at that and you just say, oh, that's about the movie itself. Wes and Roman went out, took some psychedelics and wrote this crazy story, and we're all just watching them just kind of make fun of all of us for trying to find meaning in all this. I don't think that's likely what happened. I think that Asteroid City is meant to be a metaphor for life itself. So when Augie says the more he does the play, the more his heart breaks, I see that as him more saying, the more I live my life, the less I understand the meaning and the purpose of all of it. I just know that my heart continues to break. If that's at all true, I can't help but see the grief elements of this play, of this film, as really making a really emotional point. How many of us have been in those times where we've thought to ourselves, I do not understand the purpose right now. I don't understand what is going on. Why is all this happening to me? None of this makes any sense. And the director's response is something to the effect of, good, that's okay. Keep doing it. You're doing great. Just keep telling the story. In some ways, it's an incredibly hopeful line that no matter what is happening in your life, even if you don't understand it at times, just keep living it. Just keep telling the story. When I think of grief, when I think of suffering, when I think of existentialism, I can't help but think of Viktor Frankl. Frankl was a psychiatrist who he and his family were put into Auschwitz. His entire family is killed and he survives. And he wrote one of the greatest books I've ever read in my life, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. And in this book, he doesn't do like a narrative of his time in Auschwitz in the concentration camp. What he does is he talks about things like suffering, meaning, purpose, hope, hopelessness, what's going on in his body. He talks as a doctor going through the experience. Every page I would read of that book, I'd have to stop after one page and just sit with it for like a day, because it's just that powerful. So going back to Augie and this conversation he has with the director about what is the point of this whole story, what is the meaning of all this, am I doing this right? I look at it as our response, almost like he's sitting with a God-type character, that the director is in some ways behaving as though he's omniscient. If you take this philosophy, this existentialist philosophy that everything in life is about finding meaning, suffering, heartbreak, grief, these are things to also find meaning. And in other words, they are teachers, not enemies. To a hedonist whose life goal is to pursue pleasure, eat, drink, be merry, we're all going to be gone soon, so, live it up while you can. Trying to avoid suffering and grief and loss is a fruitless endeavor because it will always be there. Suffering is an inevitability of life. You can't just be strong through grief, you have to feel through grief. And I think that also speaks to the phrase, you can't wake up if you don't fall asleep. In your 20s, I think a lot of life is about acquiring. In your 50s, you are watching parents die, friends of yours are dead. You might be looking at changes in your physical functioning and the promises you thought that you had that may or may not actually be fulfilled. Many of us think that the spouse that we married in our 20s is going to be with us, and maybe they were not the person we thought and we're no longer in that marriage anymore, or maybe a tragic accident came and took them from us. There's heartbreak that comes with that, and you cannot live life if you don't experience some heartbreak. So speaking of loss, let's talk about that Margot Robbie scene. After this conversation with the director, Jones Hall walks outside and he has a conversation with Margot Robbie's actress character, and she's dressed in this gorgeous regal queen outfit for the play that she's currently in as well. And we learn in this moment that Margot Robbie was meant to play in Asteroid City as Augie's wife. The first time I saw the film, there was so much in the scene that struck me emotionally that I wasn't really sure what to make of. Yes, it was about two actors talking about a scene that was cut, but if Asteroid City again is life and a character's scene is cut from the play, I see it as a way of talking about death yet again, that if life is a play that we are acting, that we are going through, some of the characters get cut along the way. Jones Hall does not remember the lines that he has with her, and so she starts reciting it and saying it to him of what would have happened and what they were supposed to say and how the scenes were supposed to play out. And she says, and then you say this, and then I say this, and then you said this, and then I say this. I saw that as a conversation between, literally, if you lost someone, and as though in a dream, you have that conversation with them, and you're talking through with them about your life and what you would have loved to have done together. I almost saw the scene as playing out as though a dream were playing out. And all the more interesting to me is that during that scene, they aren't standing next to each other, but they're both on balconies, and there's an open gap, there's an open space between them. Now that could have just been a creative framing, but I couldn't help but see it as that literal gap between them, as being an indicator that they can't interact except but by words and by conversation. He couldn't reach over and she couldn't reach over and they couldn't have touched hands. They had to just literally talk and be separated. I also couldn't help but notice that in her regal outfit, in looking like this queen, there was something ethereal or even angelic about the way that she looked in her beautiful hair and the outfit that just made me think that I'm not looking at two actors having a conversation. And even the cadence and the way that she spoke, it's different than all the other characters who do that wonderful deadpan delivery style. She had a very slowed down, like the whole movie at this moment, it's like if it was going at 100 miles an hour, it's gone down to like cruise control in this moment and slowed way down. The second time I watched this scene, I noticed the references to the children a lot more than the first time I saw the scene, and it just further reinforced that whatever it is I'm watching is not what I'm watching. There's a lot of other things that come to mind. I can't help but wonder if Wes and Roman see life as a play, and all of us are starring in our own plays that we're living, and everyone around us is not just individuals, that they're characters that are a part of our story, and we just have to keep on telling the story. If you look at the titles of the play in the background of some of the scenes, when you see the different marquees of the different plays that are happening, it's not plays that you're familiar with, it's very peculiar titles. I just can't help but think, what might those other symbols be that are littered throughout the film? I can't wait to watch it a third time and discover more. Let's go to one of the most perplexing parts of this movie, this moment in the end where everyone in the actor's studio is chanting, "You can't wake up if you don't fall asleep." This is one of the things that I've seen a lot of people give interpretations to, and I'm really curious what the intention was from Wes and from Roman in this scene, because in contrast to the way that all of the rest of the dialogue is spoken pretty much in this entire film, the cadence of the way that this line is spoken, the repetition to it, it suggests that there's an urgency, or maybe it's even something of the theme of the film, or it's the thesis statement of the movie, and it yet at the same time has, I think, gone over a lot of our heads as we try to understand what is being said. So first is, in going back to what Wes has said about the movie, there's something about the acting process and the actor and the craft of being an actor where you get lost in your role, and it's sort of hard to know when it's the actor versus the person and how those two roles intertwine. In fact, there's lines in the movie that get jumbled around, like I believe Jason Schwartzman's character says to Margot Robbie when he first sees her, "You're the wife who plays my actress." And I think that's a way of kind of talking about the acting process and how one of those can sometimes get mixed in with the other, and it's hard to tell who's who, and that's a way of giving yourself to the process. Willem Dafoe's character is this acting teacher, and he seems not too accidentally modeled after Lee Strasberg. And Lee Strasberg is famous for coming up with, or at least solidifying, a lot of what we know as method acting. And one of the things that he would do with his students is he would put them to sleep in these very deep relaxation places where it was a way of him saying, "I'm trying to help you get rid of any of the tension in your life or in your body." It's like a lot of mindfulness kind of stuff before we called it mindfulness. In so doing, it allows you to inhabit the character even more. So you go to sleep in order to release or relieve this tension and be ultimately relaxed, and then you wake up as this character. I think that there is something in all of that that is, on the surface level, I think part of what this line is in reference to. It just seems like when you look at the videos online of Lee Strasberg doing this with students, I can't help but see that connection there, especially with what Wes has said about this movie being about acting and actors. But the way that it's told, it seems like it's more than just the process of acting. It seems like there's a life message or something that's there with the way that it is chanted. It is very tempting to minimize grief and suffering and to try and just be strong through it. And that is often much to the detriment of what life has to teach us, and the benefit of something like resilience, where when you go through suffering, when you go through loss, when you go through grief, you come through it, and then on the other side, you're more awake to life because you have more of maybe a full appreciation of life itself and the emotional aspects of life. I see him saying something to the effect of, if you want to be awake to life, if you want to be living your life and telling the story that you're telling, you have to go to sleep first. You have to go into the grief first. I think a lot of what Wes is trying to communicate is that the necessity of grieving and feeling through your pain rather than dismissing it or ignoring it, which is ironic because A lot of us are living life as actors anyway. We're living as personas. We're trying to put ourselves out there as the kinds of people we hope people would see. Our perfectionism, our trying to be perfect, or our good deeds, or our moralistic, or our stylistic, or our coolness that we try to put out about who we are is an act in and of itself. It's not the authentic, real person. I am all for and have benefited so much personally from those times where I've just needed to cry, or I've needed to hurt, or I've needed to feel. By contrast, many of us deal with trauma and pain by numbing to that pain, whether that's through substances or through certain types of relationships or certain types of behaviors or avoidance. We're living in that space so much that it's almost like you have to stop being numb to it, but you have to relax into even though it's not relaxing, and feel through that in order to really truly be alive and to live life and to know what it feels like to hurt and to weep and to mourn and to grieve, how necessary and vital it is to experience that in life, and how much more rich and full it makes life. All of that, in my mind, has to do with this message in the movie about you cannot be awake if you don't fall asleep. Before I conclude this video, I do want to share a couple of other thoughts about this film. Let's talk about AI. The first couple of times that I saw those Wes Anderson does Star Wars or Wes Anderson does Lord of the Rings, it was kind of amusing to kind of think about what it would look like if Wes Anderson made these films. And yet at the same time, I think the curse of all of those is that it minimizes Wes Anderson as someone who's just making cool images, and there's not much else there. Yes, the popularity of it is that more people might know who Wes Anderson is. The downside, though, is that people might go, oh, he's the guy who makes the stories with fast talking and cool images. And if you watch his filmography and you look at the themes that he's tackling and the things that he's doing, it is such an immense minimization of the types of films that he's making that I think it really is a bit of a curse at this point. It's ultimately reduced the public's expectation of his movies just to be these cool images. And yes, admittedly, no one frames a shot like Wes Anderson. No one has characters written and talking the way that Wes Anderson does. And in fact, some of the complaints like, oh, it's another Wes Anderson movie. Yeah, of course. That's like complaining that Quentin Tarantino has a movie with bloody violence in it. Like, yeah, well, of course. That's what Quentin Tarantino does. He writes fast dialogue and bloody violence. That's what you want when you go see a Quentin Tarantino movie. So complaining that Wes Anderson movies are too Wes Anderson-y is a bit silly to me. I mean, that's kind of what we love about him, and why would you want him to change? You would want him to just keep on doubling down on the types of stories that he tells. One of the other observations is that this movie has one of the most stacked, amazing casts in any film ever made. Most of these actors and actresses could really lead a whole movie by themselves with their skill set and also with how well known they are already. As a viewer, when I sit and watch a film, there's always a quick reorientation to whatever the character is on screen. So if I see Steve Carell, it's going to take me like a couple of seconds to go, that's not Michael Scott, that's the motel manager. And if I have to keep doing that over and over again, I may be at some point taken out of the film's experience and out of the story because I'm constantly reorienting around all of these wonderful actors and actresses who I've seen in so many different things. The blessing is he has some of the most talented people doing some of the most wonderful characters that you can't help but love their skill set and yet at the same time feel like there's all this reorientation. So watching it again, knowing who the characters are, getting rid of that reorientation, I think it really does benefit the viewing experience because you get to enjoy the performances differently, at least for me. Should you see Asteroid City again? Yeah, absolutely you should. Especially if the first time you saw it, you weren't thinking about it as a poetic meditation on the meaning of life, and weren't considering these metaphors, allegories, and symbols about life and living life itself. And in that sense, I think that in watching the film, again, I wonder what kinds of things you'll pick up on. I wonder if the symbolism is that rich, or if I'm overreading into things. I wonder where I'm dead on in some of my interpretations, or at least close, and where I'm way off, and the things that I've said had nothing to do with what the authors intended. But regardless, that's part of how I'm processing the film. I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for spending some time with me here. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I hope that you enjoy the film, and go see it. It's a good one. Thanks for watching. You take care. Bye-bye.